Today, we are very pleased and honored to have with us Jennifer Maccarone with a report from the National Assembly. First elected in October 2018, Jennifer Maccarone is the member of the National Assembly for Westmount St. Louis, the official opposition critic for families and for people living with a handicap or on the autism spectrum, and the official opposition critic for LGBTQ2 rights and the fight against poverty and social solidarity. Ms. Maccarone is a member of the Commission on Culture and Education and the Commission on Citizen Relations. She's the first opposition critic in Canada responsible for representing the voices of people on the autism spectrum. A single mother to Sam and Bianca, who are both on the autism spectrum, Ms. Maccarone's commitment to improving services for and growing an awareness of those affected by autism comes from her first-hand experience. From 2015 until her candidacy for the Quebec Liberal Party in 2018, Jennifer served as president of the Quebec English School Boards Association, QESBA, where she was the voice of the Anglophone community's public education institutions. Prior to becoming QESBA president, she was president of the Sir Wilfrid Laurier School Board, as well as president and member of the SWSLSB Parents Committee from 2009 to 2014. She also has over 20 years experience as a marketing communications entrepreneur. Ms. Maccarone attended Marianapolis College and continued her studies in English literature at McGill University. So we are thrilled to have you here, Jennifer, again. And as they say, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure for me to be with all of you this morning, this afternoon. Thank you very much for the introduction. You'll see I'm at home, so it's likely that Sam and Bianca are going to be circulating a little bit around me today. So you'll get a little flavor of my family and my work from home situation. So again, thank you very much for the invitation. I absolutely love the introduction that you do when you talk about service above self. When you talk about, is it truth, is it fair, goodwill, better friendships, will it be beneficial, will it be fun? I'm hoping that today's talk will meet all of those expectations. And I'm hoping that people will also feel that we can certainly have an open discussion, a very transparent discussion. Those of you who know me know that that's what I always promote and what I always try to do to the best of my ability. And so I want everybody to know that I want to be a good listener. I know I'm going to talk for about 25 minutes, but I've got 2 ears, 1 mouth. So I'm hoping to listen twice as much as I speak so that I can bring your voice back to the National Assembly. I know that it's an election year as well. So in the event that I am reelected and have the ability to do so, it would be an honor and a privilege. So I was asked to give a little bit of an overview of Bill 96, and I could have done this in a day setting, in a week setting. I have very limited time, and if there's any additional information that I haven't covered or that you want me to go more into detail, by all means, when we come to the question period, we can talk more about that. So it's just a quick overview of what Bill 96, which is now Law 96, what the implications are going to be for the province, for you, for me, for my family, for your families, and the impact on Westmount, of course. So I think first and foremost, the number one thing that people were talking about when we talk about Bill 96 is the impact on the Health and Social Services Network. It's no secret if you've watched the news and you've been following what's happening with regards to Bill 96, we know that there are significant concerns about access for the Anglophone community. Already access for the Anglophone community, depending on where you live in the province, can be sketchy and very difficult. And so the concern now is that it's going to become even further problematic for members of our community if they're not identified as a historic Quebec Anglophone, so a rights holder, somebody who's attended English school or who has the right to attend English school to continue to have access to health and social services. This, in my opinion, is going to be next to impossible to implement administratively. Why? Because Our medical professionals are already overwhelmed. All of our healthcare professionals in general are overwhelmed, and you shouldn't have to show an identity card when you need to have a blood test, when you need to speak to your medical professional about something that's related to your health or the health of a member of your family. And they also don't know how to implement it, and they don't know what the impact is going to be. So I think that it's fair to say that we predict that it's going to be very challenging to implement across the network, but it is what the CAC government has been hoping to is hoping that they'll be able to impose on the public healthcare network. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback from somebody whose mic is open. So access to justice. Access to justice is.
Sorry, there's a couple here that have just come in. I'm just taking care of them.
Okay. You can still hear me, right?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, all right. So access to justice is also something that is going to evolve and is going to change. But again, not sure how it's going to be implemented, because what's happened is our current Minister of Justice, Monsieur Simon-Jeanin Barrette, is in a bit of a fight, an argument, a dispute with the Quebec justice system, specifically the Superior Court judges. Why? Because in Bill 96, what he's hoping to implement, now that it's law, is that there will no longer be a requirement for judges to have English language skills for candidates that are applying to be judges. And so that, of course, is going to be, again, very difficult to implement, because it goes against the Human Rights Tribunal, where you should and you do have access to justice in your mother tongue, because for obvious reasons, you need to be able to express yourself, you need to be able to understand what's happening in the system. So once again, I'm not sure how official language bilingualism will come into play when we're talking about having both French and English language skills for our judges who are on the bench. But that is a very important component of Bill 96. It's unclear to me how they're going to implement it, but it is something that is implemented currently. So there's likely to be lots of discussion where it's going to be, if there's a need, then we'll address the need as it comes. That's what the CAC has said. I'm not sure how that's actually going to unfold, but that again is a very concerning aspect of Bill 96. On top of that, there's also government organizations that aren't going to be required to have any knowledge of French anymore. So what does that mean? That means that within an institution, if you already have somebody who speaks English in your organization, then you're going to have to prove that you need to hire somebody who can address the needs of your clientele in English. It also means that organizations like RAMQ, like SAAQ, like Emploi Québec, Revenue Quebec will no longer have to address citizens in English, unless, of course, it's their right because they are historic Quebec Anglophones. But once again, it's going to be very difficult to implement. How are we going to identify who is a historic Quebec Anglophone? Do we all have to wear a special badge? Are we going to have a special card? How is that going to work? And my mom, who was born in Ontario, who came here to Quebec to be a nurse, to learn French, to raise her family, who married a Francophone, is she a historic Quebec Anglophone? It's really unclear how they're going to be doing that identification. Beyond that, I think specifically for Westmount, and Westmount is already taking care of this themselves, is that municipalities will no longer be able to maintain bilingual status unless, of course, they've already submitted their request to retain the status that they already have. And Westmount was one of the first municipalities to send that letter to the government, where they copied myself, they copied other MNAs to ensure that their request was clear. And so Westmount will be able to maintain bilingual status, but other municipalities who choose post-adoption of the law, that they say, well, maybe we'd like to change, maybe we feel that we've got an increase in Anglophone citizens, and so we'd like to be able to have that bilingual status, they will no longer be able to apply. They have to take care of that immediately. And so there's going to be something that's going to be a hard fixed rule that's going to be in place. After municipalities, we've also got an impact on our professional orders. So professional orders like doctors, lawyers, anybody who, psychologists, anybody that's got letters after their name will no longer be allowed to communicate in English with members, their own members, or with candidate members. That's going to be difficult. Again, I understand that they might be able to implement this as one of the articles in Bill 96, but the reality is that with such a shortage of labor workforce that we have right now, specifically in the healthcare sector, it's going to be extremely difficult and, of course, debilitating and limiting for our network for them to have to function in that way, especially if we're looking to recruit from other provinces so that we can fulfill the need. Which brings me to other very significant concerns that we have post-adoption of the bill. So let's say we need to have some psychologists, some specialists, some talent that comes from abroad, talent that comes from the States, for example. We currently have people that come here as temporary residents. Their kids have access to school here in our Anglophone school board network, and they're allowed to attend English school for a period of 5 years. Once that 5 years expires, even if you're temporary resident, your work visa is reapproved, your child would have to leave the Anglophone sector and go to the Francophone sector. The CAC has reduced that from 5 to 3 years. So if you're coming here from New York, from Maine, and you're going to be a PDG of a large organization, for example, because you bring a very specific skill set, like in information technology or in healthcare, that means, and you want to come with your family, you might be doing a double take and thinking twice about it, because it will have an impact on your children. They will not be able to attend English school for longer than 3 years now. And so again, that has large overreaching impact, not just on healthcare and our ability to meet our labor shortage, but as you can imagine, it will have impacts on our economy, specifically for metropolitan cities like Montreal, where we are destination location and we have a host of businesses and we are the economic center of the province of Quebec. So there's lots of concerns about that. So speaking of education, of course, there's going to be an impact on our education sector. I'm already hearing some echoes from our daycare network, from the CPE as official critic for families. I am very closely connected to our CPE network, and what I'm starting to hear from some of the private daycare owners and the public daycare owners is that they're starting to receive communications from the government that say ridiculous things like, you're not allowed to have English books in your daycare, you're not allowed to be speaking English in your daycare. And so there's a lot of confusion about how the charter of the French language, now that it's been modified by Bill 96, how will it be adapted and implemented in the system? So that's, again, a big concern, and we've all heard about the impact on CEGEP. So I'll come to that in the next segment. I was asked to speak a little bit about the Liberal Party, so I will. But in the CEGEP network, the students that will now register in the Anglophone CEGEP will be required to take 5 French courses. There's currently a requirement to take 2. There's now an additional 3 that students will have to take over the course of their 2 or 3 years, depending on how they're managing their program or the program that they're taking. Those courses will be within the ability of the student. So my kids, for example, that are in CEGEP are not in the upper level of French mastery. So they're in the beginner courses. So there will always be levels of mastery of the French language, and that's how the students will be identified in terms of where they're going to be going. If you're a Francophone student, however, and you're interested in attending an English CEGEP, you also have to take 5 French classes, but they're in your core subject matter. So if you're going there to study pure and applied, if you're going there to study health and social services, for example, Dawson being a good example, because they've got a very unique health program that they're offering, which is very difficult for them to offer because of the lack of space that they currently have. And of course, as we know, the CAC has refused to move forward with their expansion project. The students that are coming in will have to take 5 courses within that program in French if they're not a rights holder. So again, same thing like in the healthcare network, but probably even more profoundly difficult to implement administratively. It's a dog's breakfast. There's union requirements, there's space requirements, there are a lack of professionals who will be able to offer those classes. And in the case of a school like Dawson, there's no space. So the Ministry of Higher Education, including all of the CEGEPs, are scratching their heads because they weren't prepared for the original amendment from the CAC, which asked for this increase in French courses within the Anglophone sector. And then, of course, the unfortunate error that the Liberals made, where we said that we wanted to extend that to Anglophones, which has since been walked back. There's just no easy way to implement it. And so it's unclear on how that's going to be moving forward, but definitely not in the short term. It's going to be very challenging. And just as an aside, because I know there'll be questions on that, why did we present that as an amendment following Simon Joly Barret's amendment for the French classes for French students? It was not done in any way, shape, or form in an effort to harm the community. Hélène David, when she made the actual recommendation, thought that she was doing something that would be inclusive of the community, not having consulted us. As a member of the party, I was not consulted on that, and I can tell you that it very directly impacts me and my children, and so I am 100% opposed to it. And so we did what we could to first do a mea culpa, because it certainly was an error, and we've done everything we could since then to correct it. It was following a larger tournée. Those of you who know Kathleen well, Kathleen, when she was minister responsible of Anglo affairs in the previous government, one of the things that she had done was go to the four corners of Quebec, did a huge consultation of the Anglophone community to see what they wanted. And this is in large part what many members of our community are seeking, is access to more French courses. We want our kids to be bilingual. We want our kids to stay in the province. And in order to stay in the province, well, we know that they need to master French. And so this was in part of the plan to try to ensure that there was access to more French language courses, but fully recognized that it wasn't done in the right manner. It certainly wasn't inclusive, and it will certainly have an impact. And so I know that we'll probably talk more about that afterwards. Bill 96 will also have an impact on businesses that have between 25 to 50 employees, whereas now we know that the original Bill 101 applied to 50 employees and more. Now they're backtracking it to the 25 to 50 employees who have to register with the Office québécoise de la langue française. They'll have to implement a programme de francisation, so a francization, a French program, to make sure that their employees can work in French. And businesses that do not apply the new rules will be subject to penalties. The OQLF has been given many new powers where they will be able to go into organizations to seize documents, to seize their work tools. They will be able to, in fact, halt and investigate. They essentially have more powers than public security, which is, as I'm sure you can imagine, very stressful for our economic sector. There's lots of concerns. It's also been in the media significantly of late because people don't know how they're going to implement it. It means that many businesses become unattractive when you're looking to recruit talent, and many businesses are seeking to establish themselves elsewhere because the rules, as they're implemented today, without any transition, without any discussion with the community, I don't think that it's not that it isn't possible. It's more, how are we going to do it? How are we going to accompany? How will we implement the bill? Does it have to be immediate? Can we look at it in 5 years? How can we do it in a proactive fashion? Bill 96 is not proactive, it's very directive. And so I completely understand the concerns of our PME in our riding who are likely to be very stressed. There's no more access status in English. So I heard somebody saying that they were at a wedding. Anybody who's getting married now post sanction of Bill 96 who would like to have their marriage certificate in English, if you give birth to a child and you want to have the birth certificate in English, you can no longer do that. All access status are only going to be available in French from this point on. And so again, it certainly sends a strong message about our place in the community as Anglophones. And I'm not sure how that will impact us later on, but any active status now will no longer be available in English. I don't know if you want me to go into detail on sanctions and penalties, but there certainly will be sanctions and penalties for municipalities, for public organizations, for businesses who choose to not implement Bill 96 and say that, you know, we're going to do our own thing. There's also penalties for people that If you complain and it's an unwarranted complaint, well, then there's penalties for those individuals as well. And that's meant to be the counterbalance, because there's lots of concerns about, well, is anybody going to start calling the OQLF because I spoke to my patient in English? And so there's lots of concerns about that. And the penalties are varied depending on how many times you have been sanctioned and the type of complaint. The notwithstanding clause. The notwithstanding clause is huge, because Bill 96 and the Charter of the French language override Quebec's Charter and Canada's Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. And so what they had to do in order to enact Bill 96 and in order to implement many of their articles was to use the notwithstanding clause. As we've seen, we've already got some leaders in the Anglophone community in the education sector. So EMSB has already deposited their injunctions. They are going to stand up against it. And this is what needs to happen if people wish to fight against Bill 96. It has to come from the community. The community needs to stand up to say that my rights are being unduly respected. And so we need to speak up about it. And so it remains to be seen where that's going to take us. But it's kind of in line with Bill 21 and same thing, the injunctions they needed to use, the notwithstanding clause for that. And that was actually done through closure. So baillon, for those of you that know that term better, it's the first time that we've ever modified la Charte des droits et libertés without consultation, without proper debate, and it was a very sad day. And it means that what the government is seeking to do, unfortunately, the CAQ wants to be judge and jury when it comes to all of these considerations. As it pertains to the Liberal Party, what we have said, because I know that many of you want to know, where do we stand? What are we seeking? What can we look for from a potential Liberal government, and what's our position on Bill 96? We voted against Bill 96. We voted against Bill 21. We voted against the first Bill 9, which was the immigration bill, which I didn't mention in Bill 96. All immigrants, asylum seekers, anybody who's coming to the province now will only have 6 months to learn English. That's a rule that's implemented as of today. It will be impossible. It is not human to expect these individuals who are often already in situations of vulnerability to immediately master French. And so that's another unfortunate reality of Bill 96. So the Liberal Party, what we have said is, first and foremost, we're not going to renew the notwithstanding clause. It's a clause that removes the human right override. And so what we have said is that we will not do that. We're going to give students back the right to attend the cégep of their choice. That's very, very important, because one of the things that's happening with Bill 96 is there's going to be a limitation, obviously, of the students who can attend Anglophone cégeps, because they have also enforced a clause that will inhibit their ability to increase their enrollment. What that means is it's going to be la crème de la crème of the Francophone sector who want to attend an Anglophone cégep because they want to master English so that they can be better prepared to access the workforce and have access to better jobs. It means that they'll have to be the best to get in, because Riverpool, with a limited amount of space, is going to be extremely competitive. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we're going to give students back the right to attend the cégep of their choice. We're going to give the magistrature back the rights to appoint judges according to their needs. It's completely inappropriate, as I mentioned earlier, that Simon Jolin Barrette thinks that he's the one that should be deciding what the bench requires. And so we would be giving back that right to the judges. One of the things that I think is crucial is we're going to dispel any myths about access to healthcare and social services. Those of you who are not aware, back in the day, I'm not sure how many years ago, but when it was a Liberal government in power, prior to Article 15, that idea that within the health and social service network that our professionals had to only treat their patients and their clients in in French, that's something that was never enforced. So it's an article in la Charte de la langue française that was never enforced, and it was done because we wanted to ensure that the rights of the minority language community, the Anglophone community, was respected. And so we're going to make sure that all concerns about health and social services are dispelled, because we have a right as minority language rights holders, but also anybody who wants to have access to those services in their language of their choice should be accompanied. That's just how it should be. It shouldn't be a language test. It should be that we're here to provide the service and the care. And so we're going to make sure that that's clear. We're going to make sure that all infrastructure projects are not determined based on their language. Dawson is the example for this specifically. Our CEGEP system is not identified the way our primary and our secondary education system is identified. So you've got an Anglophone system and you've got a Francophone system. In the CEGEP system, it doesn't work that way. And so when they're requesting needs for infrastructure, like we need that expansion project, Dawson is short 11,000 square feet. That's a huge amount, square meters. It's a huge amount of space that they require. Why? Because they're going to be providing essential services to the population. These are professional programs and they're working out of closets. They're recycling their space. They're not able to meet their needs. That was a project that was approved under a Liberal government, and it was reapproved by the CAC 2 years ago, only to say we've changed our minds. Why? Because we don't want to support Anglophone institutions. That's something that's never going to happen with a Liberal government. You have my word. Why? Because it's completely short-sighted, and they are measured by the same rules and regulations as every single CEGEP in the province of Quebec. Not based on language, it's based on need. And so that's something that we're going to be continuing. We're also going to evaluate the administrative burden of Bill 96 on the economy and on businesses. Now that it applies to the 25 to 50 employees, one of the things that we've said is that we want to do a proper accompaniment. We want to make sure that we're doing it proactively. We want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that not only ensures that, yes, we're protecting and promoting the French language, but we're also encouraging people to learn. We're also encouraging our businesses instead of hitting them on the head with a hammer. So we want to do it right. And that's one of the things that we're committed to. I mentioned the 6-month delay for our immigrants or new arrivals to Quebec, that they have to master the French language. That's something that's going to be completely abolished. It's just a ridiculous idea. One of the things that we absolutely need is to make sure that our community and for the people that are choosing to come to Quebec have access to French language courses. So before we can even say that we're going to do that, let's make sure that we're actually able to meet the need to give people these language courses and this language training. In fact, the bill that was deposited by Greg Kelly in the previous mandate that we've just completed has been implemented into Bill 96. So that's good news. It means that there should be free access to language courses for those who want, whether it's to perfect your French, to learn French. And that's one of the things that's going to be hugely important in us moving forward, but that 6-month delay would no longer exist. And I mentioned the notwithstanding clause. I think it goes without saying that one of the things that is, of course, extremely important to us is the respect of the Anglophone community, the respect of the minority community. Everybody, I think we all agree that we want to promote French. Par rapport à des gens qui nous écoutent aujourd'hui, vous êtes probablement tous bilingues. Puis c'est important. It's something that we want to continue to promote. We have such an opportunity in the province of Quebec to be bilingual, to promote that. And I think it's part of our richness. It's part of what makes us distinct as a society, but it should never be done in a way that harms any minority communities. How the majority treats the minorities says a lot about who they are as a community. The other thing, I did touch on it for the CEGEP courses. I don't know that you want me to come back to it. I don't think that we have to, but I think one of the things that is important for us to recognize is the Liberal Party, currently of the 4 parties that exist in the National Assembly that have been recognized, it's the only party that is overtly federalist. We've been having lots of conversations recently in the media and in the National Assembly, whether it's in question period, in commission, or in interviews. The idea of sovereignty keeps coming back. Why? Because elements like Bill 96, like conversations that we're hearing from the CAC about how they want to move forward as a nationalist party, it seems as it's just covertly separatist. And so I think that we need to be concerned about that. The other parties are also separatist, independentist, and so what they're seeking is for Quebec to be isolated and to be its own country. And so I do think that we need to be concerned about that. The Liberal Party is the only federalist party, and I know that there's other new groups that are cropping up, and I'm a big believer in democracy. So anybody that wants to put their face on the sign, I fully respect that, because I can tell you from personal experience, it's tough. It's not easy to be an elected official. It's not easy to put yourself out there. So a lot of respect for the people that are choosing to do it. But I think that also what makes the Liberal Party unique is that we're the only party that's seeking to unite all Quebecers. And that is, as you can imagine, and as you've seen over the years, not an easy task to do. So how do we unite what the Francophone community is seeing by way of protection of language, by way of promotion of their culture, as well as integrate and implement the rights of the minority language Anglophone communities, so that we can have some harmony, so that we can work together. And the only way to do that is to be in government, to be able to set the legislation, to be able to control the debate, to be able to talk about that. Because if you want to enact any real change, it's the reality of how our system works here in the province, and maybe there's somewhere else that works differently, but you need to be empowered to do it. It's official opposition is a role that is hugely important. It has been extremely enriching for me to learn the legislative process as if I was a minister in my own right, without having all the responsibility, because I am not the elected official that can enact any laws. But it is a big voice. It is important to be a critic. It is important to hold the government's feet to the fire. But the reality is that the way it works in the National Assembly, it's by time, it's by minutes, it's by the importance of the number of seats. And le nerf de la guerre, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody who's here with us today, is parliamentary debate and commission. So the government controls the legislative agenda. They're the ones that will deposit bills. They're the ones that choose which bills will be called for debate and consultation. I've deposited bills in the past. I've had the privilege to deposit private member bills, two of which have been called for study and debate. One of them was for the CUSIM, so the Glen, to transfer some buildings to McGill, which was a very controversial private member bill, and we made history because of a filibuster from the Parti Québécois. But that aside, the reality is that it's the government that sets the agenda. So in order to make real change, you have to be in government. And then you have the less seats that you have, the less minutes that you have for debate in commission when you're debating a bill, including filibustering, including sending amendments, including making very necessary changes. There were very minor changes that the government accepted, for example, in Bill 96, but that meant hours and hours and hours and hours of work. It meant that we needed to send multiple M&As to sit in that commission. You are limited to a number of 4 seats when you have a certain amount of elected officials and you're the official opposition. So if you're an independent, for example, you have no time. You have to have consent from members to attend. You don't often get the right to vote. It can be very limiting experience. So the less members that you have elected, the less important your voice is at the National Assembly, and unfortunately, the less impactful you will be in terms of making change. And I think what we want to do is acknowledge that Quebec's English-speaking community is dynamic. We are vibrant contributors to Quebec society. We want to make sure that we have as many Anglo MNAs in a party that's going to be able to enact real change. I want to be that voice for you, obviously. I have been trying over the past 4 years to be that voice, whether it's in my caucus, whether it's in commission, whether it's in the media, whether it's in question period, whether it's on the ground. I think it's very important that we express our needs because that's what it is to be an open and modern society. And Quebec has a responsibility, regardless of who's in government, to respect the official language of minority communities and other minorities in the province. I'm not sure if you want me to continue to talk about that, or if we should go to a question period. I think the only thing that I would end on is to say that one of the things that I have been working on, and if anybody is interested in moving forward with these types of discussions, is, and it's completely nonpartisan. It can be as partisan as you want or as nonpartisan as you want, but I would love to have more kitchen table conversations, more access and discussion with yourselves, with members of your communities that are local to you, your neighbors, I want to be as accessible as possible. I want to be able to talk to people about what the impact is of Bill 96, like what we've done here. I want to hear what the community is seeking and what changes they would like as well. Things that are going well, things that are maybe not going so well. It's going to be important that we have those roundtable and very open discussions. So voila, here's my talk in a nutshell. I can stay longer than 1 o'clock. I realize I kind of went over time. And so if you'd like for me to just stick around because we have a longer question period, then I'm all yours.
We would be delighted if you did stick around, Jennifer. And so we have someone with their hand up. It was Nick. Please go ahead, Nick, with your question.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. I actually had the privilege of going to the National Assembly the other week with some fellows as part of my work. It was a really incredible visit. But I guess my question, and maybe I'm going to just dive us right into the deep end, but I have some serious preoccupations about Monsieur Jolin Barrette in overall, you know, from the beginning when I started paying attention to his role in politics and in the news. And over the years, you know, in terms of the legislation and the things that he's advocated for, it's just made me even more worried in terms of the future because he's younger than me. I'm 37 and he's younger than I am. And so, you know, he's going to be sticking around for a long time. And so my question to you is sort of, in your experience, closer to politics and the CAQ and legislation, you know, how much of him and his activity or what he speaks for is him personally and his agenda, and how much of it reflects the CAQ? And, you know, because I said, you know, I see a lot of dangerous comparisons in my mind with some certain politicians in the United States in terms of the way in which he slants things and presents information and crafts legislation.
Okay, so I can't. I mean, I don't live inside Simon's head, so I can't speak to is it really him? Is it just his party? My experience with Minister Jolin Barrette over the past 4 years has not been a positive one. He is often described as black and white, robotic. People have given him that kind of a label. And what I have seen, whether it's debate on LGBT rights issues, I was the spokesperson for the family law reform bill that was adopted in not its entirety, but we had to split that bill because of how he managed his parliamentary agenda. He is not somebody who is open-minded. He's somebody who I would say is overtly separatist. He's somebody who is not kind to or cares for minority communities, whether they are of linguistic minorities or people that are from cultural communities. And I think we saw that with Bill 9 and how he treated our immigrants who were coming here, those 15,000 dossiers that were just thrown into the garbage and not given any due consideration. So there is no caring, there is no compassion. That is not how they work. That is not how the Minister of Justice works. Is that true of all of the members of the CAQ? No. But is it true of them as a government? Yes. They are not a government that gives consideration to people who are in situations of vulnerability. They are populist, and that's how they manage, not just by law, but that's how they presented themselves. So it's almost like you say one thing and then you might do something else. I would like to be able to say that, but they speak to a very specific segment of the population that likes that kind of conversation. So for example, in the family law reform, one of the original things that the minister presented was if you wanted to, because now you can change your gender marker. So on your civil documents, you'll have an M, an F, and you now have access to an X. So if you're a person who is in transition, if you're a person who identifies as non-binary, this is something that has been long awaited for 8 years. One of the things that he said that if you wanted to have access to that, well, you would have to have had gender assignment surgery. Well, that created all kinds of an uproar and concern in the community, and that's just who they are. So when we were talking about human rights, for example, the impact of the CEGEP courses on kids like mine that have special needs who would never be able to graduate, if they made these things a requirement, that's a very real concern. Implication if they were to implement the charter of the French language, for example, for kids that are graduating from high school who cannot complete their French exit exam, their ministry exam, and they're not going to be giving any derogation. There's some very real concerns on a human level. So I would say that your perception of who he is and who they are is sadly accurate. And I wish it was different. But we saw that with Bill 9 with immigration. We saw that with Bill 21 and the unfortunate impact on our Jewish community, the unfortunate impact on women specifically, the unfortunate impact that it's going to have in healthcare, in public service, in education. It's just who they are, and that's just too bad.
Thank you, Jennifer. Rod, do you have a question?
On the workplace issue, search without a warrant. This is shades of the Gestapo under the Nazis, shades of Putin in Russia. In fact, Mr. Legault is trying to create a linguistic genocide, and he's ignoring the indigenous community totally, who are the original settlers. The French are only the second people who landed, not the first, and he ignores them all.
Yeah.
Can one say anything more than that?
I neglected to mention, you're right, Bill 96 has a direct impact on First Nations and Aboriginal community for exactly the same things that we've cited in terms of impact for the Anglophone community. So there's definitely that. One of the things that we have said is that moving forward, that's something that we would completely remove from the bill. And so they would be, the Aboriginal First Nations community would be exempt, as they should be. It's part of the request from the Commission Vient. It's part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and requests. And so that's something that I think absolutely has to change. The new powers that the Office québécois de la langue française will have is of grave concern, I think, to everybody. And we should all be very worried about that, because the powers that they have, and even though the minister has publicly said, no, there's nothing to worry about because they won't be able to come in and just seize your work tools. That's not what the bill says. That's not what's written in black and white. So it's his interpretation. And now that he's created a whole brand new ministry for himself, who will be responsible for the Office québécois de la langue française, it remains to be seen how he's going to be training these individuals and how he's going to be disseminating the law and implementing it across the board. There will be some time before that happens, because organizations will have now a year, for example, in businesses before they can fully implement that, the cours de francisation and the impact of Bill 96 and the Charter of the French language for organizations that are 25 to 50 employees. They'll have a year now. They said that today in terms of how they're going to be implementing. So I think you're right to be very concerned about their powers. Can we change it? Yes. But the only way to change it will be to elect a new government, because the other groups, for example, Québec solidaire and Parti québécois, are for the bill. They voted for the bill. And so we don't have a lot of allies out there.
Thank you, Jennifer. Before we go to Jim Fairs with a question, I wonder if I could just sneak one in and ask you if you know of any other court challenges in the offing besides the MSB.
Yeah, so there is another court challenge for Bill 40, which we also voted against. Bill 40 was the abolition of the governance structures for our education sector. So we, as an Anglophone community, still have elected commissioners to represent our rights at the school board, and we still have school boards. But what Bill 40 did was they have gotten rid of all the elected officials. There's no such thing as the rights of the community to elect their very local voice to represent their interests within the public institution. In the Francophone sector, it's all gone. And in the Anglophone sector, there is a court challenge for Bill 40 to say that you can't apply it to the minority language community because we have the right to manage and control our institutions. And so we expect that there will be a judgment that will be coming forward by the end of the year. It's a long time coming. The other court challenge that we had seen was Bill 21, which EMSB won. And so now, at least in the Anglophone sector, Bill 21, which states that you can't wear any religious symbol and work within a public institution, will not apply in the Anglophone education sector. So, and I might be missing one, but that's what I'm aware of currently.
Okay. Thank you kindly. So we have Jim Ferris with a question, followed by Peter Starr. Jim, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. I'll try not to make this too convoluted. In my mind, as far as the CAC is concerned, the regions are not the problem. The island of Montreal is the problem.
You're right.
This is the thing that they have to save themselves from now. And the second comment is the Liberal Party in Quebec, as well as all of the federal parties, I'm sure, are in a situation where, well, we're scared to death to say anything or to challenge, particularly the notwithstanding clause, because we don't feel like wiping ourselves off the face of the earth in Quebec. They're afraid that they're not going to get any votes. So how do you, or the federalists, the federal parties, manage to send a message into the regions saying, you know what, like there's a way to do this that doesn't have to be so draconian? How do you send that message, and what are the hopes?
Carefully. Thank you for actually presenting that. You're exactly right. And that's why I was saying earlier, you know, I know that it's not going to be an easy vote this year. I know that there's a lot of concern. I know that there's a lot of people that feel that the Liberals have not met their expectations, or they're disappointed in the Liberals. But I think that you're right, and you've hit the nail on the head, and that it's such a difficult conversation because we're the only party that actually is trying to unite all of the different linguistic groups and cultural communities. And so it's such a delicate conversation. If you know, it's interesting. I've been giving the Medal of the National Assembly to organizations in the riding who've been working to support our seniors specifically throughout the pandemic, because God knows they have really gone above and beyond, and they deserve recognition. And when I show the medal to the residents, because I try to make sure everybody gets a chance to see it. If you look at the medal, it's got a replica of the first legislature, and what they're debating is language. So just to say that this is a conversation that has been ongoing for years and years. So I think, to answer your question, it's one of the reasons why when people say, how come you're not saying that you're just not going to withdraw Bill 96? Well, that's why. Because we recognize that there needs to be a conversation where we are promoting the French language. It's not all doom and gloom. There are some elements in Bill 96 that can be implemented. We do want to accompany members of our community, for example, to have access to French courses. We do want to accompany businesses to be able to thrive here and work within the Francophone community and establish businesses, let's say, outside of Montreal. In order to do that, we need to speak French. So, but I think we also need to be honest and transparent and say that we want to do that, but we also want to protect the other communities that we represent, whether they voted for us or not. It's important. So I think you have to have a good leader. I think you have to have open conversations. Think you need to have good candidates and good representatives in those regions who are going to be able to carry the voice forward. We have said we're not renewing the notwithstanding clause, which will mean lots of elements of Bill 96 will no longer be able to be applied. That's just how it is. Not completely remove the bill. So it's a balancing act. If you want to be in government, you want to legislate, you want to be able to make real change, you have to be able to meet the needs of the many, but respect the needs of the individuals. And so I think a lot of it's going to depend on who's out there. I am on tournée. So just yesterday, it's a virtual tournée. So yesterday I was in Gaspésie, les Îles de la Madeleine. I was in Chibougamau, and they do send me on the road. So actual travel on the road. Tomorrow I'm in the Malbaie. And what am I doing? Well, I'm talking to all of those groups. I'm speaking with Francophones. I'm speaking with community groups. I'm going to the organizations where my heart lives. My heart lives in community service. My heart lives in issues that are related to people that have needs, whether it's adults, children, whether it's handicaps, whether it's people in situations of homelessness. So I'm going to speak to all of those groups so that I can express what we want to accomplish and let them know that we're going to be there for them, but that doesn't mean that we should neglect anybody else. I think that we have such a wonderful story that we could be conveying. We could be changing the world as a province, but we need to be given the chance to do it. And I think that we need to have those open conversations. We need to have more immigration. You know, we need to have more people coming in and establishing themselves in the regions. And so it's not this scary conversation of somebody that's going to come in and completely take over my culture. It's going to make you better. It's not going to diminish you. It's going to enhance you. And so I think a lot of it is in how you present it.
Thank you, Jennifer. Peter, you have a question? Peter, unmute. Okay.
Now can you hear me?
Now we can.
Jennifer, thanks very much for coming today. This has been really a treat to see what's going on up in Quebec. But one thing that worries me about the notwithstanding clause is, from what I understand, if Mr. Legault ever wanted to go towards sovereignty or separation, he wouldn't need a referendum. He could just use the notwithstanding clause and wake up one morning and saying, "Hey, Quebec, we're going separate." Walk into Parliament, and there you go.
Yes, you are correct.
Now that's scary.
Is that what they intend to do? I'm not going to sleep tonight thinking about that now. But I mean, I hope not. I hope not. I think that they don't want the ballot question to be related to sovereignty. And so what they have said repeatedly is, we're not going to do a referendum. We don't want to separate. We're nationalists, not separatists. But every single one of their actions, you know, it does not speak to that statement. And they certainly seek to divide the population, not encourage us to work together. And so should we be concerned? Yes. How do we stop that? The only way to stop that is to stop the CAQ from being in power and to send them a real message. Kind of the way the population sent a real message to the Liberals in the last election.
Well, thank you. And that's what's keeping me awake at night.
Yeah, and rightfully so.
Do we have any other questions for Jennifer?
At some point, that's
A question.
Humam, was that you? Do you have a question?
Yeah, please.
Please go ahead.
Do you think technology could solve the issue of the language?
Do I think technology could solve the issue?
Yes. Using translation device.
Maybe in certain formats, but I think ultimately, like for example, yes, I think a translation device, for example, on websites, for government websites would be a great thing. In fact, I've been advocating for websites to be adapted for the visually impaired and for our seniors, so that you have the ability to make it auditory. And if you make it auditory, it means that you also adapt it to multiple languages. So absolutely, for those kinds of services, yes.
It is already existing, the auditory.
Not on government websites.
No, I mean auditory as a person.
Oh, yes, yeah. So it's
I can speak to you in French using my device.
It's tools that exist. Should they be implemented on those sites? Yes, but now with Bill 96, they no longer have to translate and offer those services necessarily in English, so it's complicated. But in other formats, like I know, like for example, at the Jewish, if you go to the Jewish because you want to have access to a service and you urgently require an accompaniment, and you go in and you don't speak English or French, they will provide translation services. It's not done through any technology though, it's a person that will help support you. Is there a way to adapt that within our public service network? Maybe it'll solve some of the problem, but the reality is it goes beyond to have a government that has the will and the desire to implement it as a tool so that we can meet the needs of the members of those communities that require support. And currently we're not faced with a government who cares to do such a thing. Because there would be a lot of expense related to it as well. As I'm not an IT expert, but I can imagine it would be costly.
It could be a solution.
Absolutely.
Without fighting.
Thank you, Humam and Jennifer. Are there any other questions before we conclude? I don't see any other hands. Jennifer, thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak with us again. Your report from the trenches is very much appreciated. We wish you every success and support you in maintaining your emotional and your political stamina through all of this, and for giving us the real information and cutting through what we may or may not hear through the media. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we hope that you'll be back to give us an update.
You're very kind. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you so much for the invitation. I know that we had limited time. It is a sincere offer. My team is here. If anybody wants to meet with me, have a phone call with me, do an email chain, come to my office. You know, we're starting to trickle back out post-COVID and start seeing people's faces. I had the pleasure of seeing Jim recently at Family Day. Anybody who wants to speak with me because you have concerns, you have questions, because I didn't get a chance to speak with you, you want me to come and meet with you and with other people, it's an open invite. Please contact me. I would very much like to continue the dialogue. We didn't get to talk about all the other issues that I'm sure are of concern to you beyond Bill 96. It is not the only thing that's happening in government. There are other bills that have been adopted. You know, we now have a new national ombudsman for student rights. We have, you know, the family law reform, which is huge, huge, huge. There's so much to talk about that because we're going to be moving in to talk about things like surrogacy. And so we've got lots of major conversations that need to be discussed, as well as healthcare, environment, habitation municipale. On a des choses à jaser. We've got things to talk about. So don't be shy to get in contact with me or a member of my team.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And your contact information happens to be in the chat, nor put it in there, so everyone can feel free to take that. And we know how busy you are, so thank you again, and we will let you go. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.